Well, g'day everyone, and welcome to a great episode of Club Grubbery tonight. We've vented a bit of steam in the last few hours, John. We can smell blood in the water, and we're not going to let up. We're being relentless in what we're doing because we know that everyone's getting a bit rattled. And of course, the reason people are getting rattled, John, is because a lot of other Australians who have sort of been a bit drowsy the last few years are starting to wake up. That's been
true.
really, really evident. And as you can see in the pictures behind us, there are a great many Australians who are concerned. And a lot of them now are wondering how we disseminate information to those we love or those we get into conversation with, because they are realising, as I have in the last few days, that, as I said, more people are waking up. And to help us with that tonight, we have a wonderful guy on all the way from the UK. It's just after 7 in the morning over there. He's a little bit cold. He's a little bit sleepy. He's an all-round good bloke, and we can say that, John, because we've spent some time with him in New Zealand, and we're speaking today with a behaviour and communication expert in David Charalambous. Welcome, David.
Good morning, guys. Good to see you.
It's good to be here, mate.
Oh,
And
good evening for you.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's been a good evening because we've had a good day. And you run an organisation called reachingpeople.net, and you've got some great resources there. Now, I first met you in New Zealand in Christchurch. We shared a place together with Professor Angus Dalgleish and Paul Marrick and a few others for the New Zealand Doctors SOS tour that we did over there. It was a fantastic event. And we got to spend a whole week together in between events, eating. And I have to say, your choice of chocolate is impeccable. You picked the finest chocolate, and I'm also glad that you paid for it. But not only did we enjoy your conversations, your presentations at the conferences, we thoroughly enjoyed the banter and the conversations we had, all of us together while Michelle was looking after us, which we found we had a lot of things in common in. I'm sure you'd agree.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was a great week. One of the beautiful things about the New Zealand trip is a lot of the conferences, you're so pushed for time, but we had enough time to get to know each other and really, but because it's really important, isn't it? You often don't get that enough time to, do the social things and just relax and eat food together. And I think that's when you really learn about people and you get really good conversations going then. So yeah, it was brilliant. And yeah, the conversations that we were talking about, the behavioral stuff that you used to do in the airlines is really fascinating, because I was aware of the problems that the airlines had with culture and the pilot errors, and a lot of that's from behavior, and they really did a really good job of removing that element, didn't they?
They really did, and we discussed a lot of similarities in approaches because I've instructed in that field as you are doing now. That's your career. But I've just spent 2 days in the hospital system in a great hospital with great staff, and I was treated very, very well. But I was approached by a number of staff who recognised me, who said that that they watch what we talk about, they understand where we're coming from, and they're saying that more and more people are having these conversations. And many of the people in the photos behind John and I, which was at Canberra a couple of years ago, the biggest rally in Australia's history, they're all now being confronted with people who call them nut jobs. As I have been approached by people who drew a line through me 3 years ago, who are now saying, listen, we think you were right. And we have this, all of us, because we've been awake for so long now, we have all this information, but we've got to be careful how we present it, haven't we, David? And that's where your specialty comes in. If we want to impact as many people as possible and get us all on the same page to improve the spirit of our nations, then we have to do this carefully. And that's why we've got you on tonight, and glad to have you. So can you give us an example to start with of how we kick off a conversation with somebody who might be showing a little bit of interest in our position?
Yeah, well, let me share first a very powerful metaphor. And that in itself, I found when people understand this metaphor, they generally change their approach because it really appeals to them. So one of the biggest things in psychology and conversations and belief systems is that people feel threatened from information that's too far away from what they currently believe. Okay. So if you think about somebody that's had no exposure to any of the information that you guys know, and you have a conversation with them and you don't think, you just talk freely, are you going to sound a little bit crazy? Okay. You think about it. Literally the world is a bit crazy right now. And if somebody's living in a sort of cocoon where they're not exposed to any of that, or they haven't been exposed to any of that, we're going to look, anyone that the truth always looks a little bit crazy. And that's the thing. So we talk about this metaphor, and we call it the hotel of knowledge. So it takes quite a long while to accumulate the understanding. And you think each floor is understanding on previous understanding. Yeah. And it takes a while to understand what's going on. You've got to build understanding on so many different subjects. Now, you're then in your penthouse, which is you're in the accumulation and summary of your knowledge. And if you're talking to someone that hasn't come in the lobby, if you're shouting down from the penthouse, there's no connection. The distance is just too great. That makes sense. So the first thing you really want to do in all conversations is think about, where is this person? Okay. Where are they on what they understand? How can I meet them where they are? Okay. That's one of the really big considerations. And if whatever you talk about is too far away from what they currently believe, then you're going to have such a disconnect. And what they're going to do, they're going to shut down, and they're generally going to call you one of a number of things. And you'll know it straight off the top of your head. It's going to be conspiracy theorist. You're one of those. You're right wing, etc., because it's too much for them, and they shut down. And that's one of the biggest things. And there's a number of kind of concepts like that if we understand, then when we're talking to people, we can then engage with them. But most conversations actually don't ever get to that stage. Most conversations end up being like a game of table tennis. You ever had that feeling where you say one thing, they say one thing, and then you just go back and forth? That is a clear indication of one of the second principles that's really, really important, is that people generally don't listen to people that are not on their side. That makes sense. So you've got to find a way to show the other person that you actually are on their side, because the media has done a fantastic job, okay, of painting this caricature of what type of person you are if you don't do as you're told, and you're not a good citizen, you don't care about people's health, and you're threatening granny and all these things. So before you even get into a conversation, that person is already seeing you as the enemy, and therefore they're going to pretty much dismiss everything you say. That makes sense. Even just those two concepts there, if people understand those and navigate those, they're going to be off to much, much, much better footing.
So what you're basically saying is, if you go into a room in a burning house where somebody's sound asleep, and you lean down into their ear and scream, "Fire, fire, fire," they're likely to jump up and leap out the window. But if you wake them gently, just nudge them and say, "Listen, don't be alarmed. Everything's okay, but the house is on fire. We've got to get you out of here."
Yeah, well, essentially what you have to do is to realize that their conscious mind is like the watchman at the gate. Yeah, it's the bouncer at the nightclub. It's the security guard at the front. And if you say anything that they interpret, there's the key question. It's not whether it's real or not in reality. It's how they interpret it. If they interpret it as a threat to their well-being, they are going to basically shut down, and they're usually going to attack you, because in fact they feel that you're attacking them. That makes sense. So you've got so many of these different concepts that once you get them all correct, it's a bit like a golf swing or anything that happens in a second. When you see a professional golfer versus an amateur golfer, there's a massive difference. But it's only 1 second, isn't it? Like years and years all go into that one moment. So a conversation is so many different things that happen at once. And if you get any one thing that triggers their defense, then you can't have a conversation with them. Yeah. And that brings me on to another point that's really important, is that you can't really tell anyone anything. Now, what do I mean by that? You can show them, but you can't tell them. So if somebody said to you, let's say you've found out that one of the people in the local council is not honest. Yeah. but he has a reputation of being very honest, and everyone's seen him being very good, but you know something the others don't know. And then you turn around and say to everyone, oh, this person can't be trusted. Okay. They've not had the experience that led you to that conclusion. That makes sense. So their experience differs from your experience. So what are they going to do? They're going to usually reject what you're saying. So you can't really give people conclusions is another thing. And that was one of the main topics that I was presenting on, is that don't give people conclusions, don't give people outputs, show them some stories or information in a very easable way to absorb, where they will come to the same conclusion that you came to. That makes sense? Because what happens is, if somebody believes that 2 + 2 = 5, and you say no, it equals 4, what are they going to do? Just going to say you're crazy. That's not, yeah, that's not right. So this is again one of these massive concepts that when you get it, and it takes a little bit of practice to understand this one, because I find myself doing it from time to time. Like I was on the dog walk the other day, and we got into a conversation with a couple, and then I made one of those conclusion statements, and I thought, oh my, so we all do it. But if I would have changed what I said and just asked a gentle question or shared a bit of information, they could have then come to that conclusion of their own. And this is why filmmaking becomes very powerful. And that's why the media is so powerful now. So if you watch any opening scene in a movie, okay, they don't tell you what to think of the characters, do they? Okay. They show you what the character's doing, and then you make your own conclusion. And that's why films are so very powerful at imparting. And that's why when you look at the media, pretty much if you talk to anyone now, they're going to hate a certain country and they're going to love another country, and they're going to hate certain people and love certain people, but they've never met those people. They've never been exposed to them. They've probably never been to those countries. So they're basing their opinion on what they've witnessed on that screen. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And there's another really, really key point, is we don't interact with reality. We interact with the GPS system we've got in our car. Okay. What the experiences that we've had and where we think things are. That makes sense. So, and it's when two people have very different experiences and different exposure, that's when you get this real disconnect in conversation. So a big part of it is really understanding how the other person is seeing the world. And if we would have had their same experiences, there's a good chance we would have seen the same thing.
Yep.
The people in the freedom movement have just exposed themselves, and I use the word freedom movement loosely just to describe the group of people that are pushing against the kind of organized tyranny that we're seeing today. They've either seen with their own eyes, or they've been exposed to information that means that their viewpoint previously cannot be true, and they've had to change the way they see things.
Well, we got some advice pretty early on, Hoodie, didn't we, from Chris Uhlmann? He was at Channel 9 at the time. When we were trying to break through to the media and get some traction with them, I mean, he did say to us, didn't he, just keep the message simple and come up with a few key points that you really want to achieve, and don't stray from them. And essentially, we took that advice, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. And he basically said, don't give the editor anything to play around with and make you look like a baby killer. So, be succinct, be sharpened to the point, and be as factual as you possibly can.
Yeah.
But there are so many different narratives and so many different perspectives on all of this stuff at the moment. And John, if you haven't got another question, I'm really interested at the moment in working out your ideas, Dave, about how people have been deceived. What's gone on? You talk about the path of least resistance.
Yeah, so everyone's aware of propaganda, okay, and it's been around for thousands of years. So propaganda is effectively disseminating information to influence the public's opinion or behavior. So it doesn't matter whether that's factual or not. You can actually use factual information sometimes and mislead people. You just present it in a slightly distorted way. But what you've got is that governments, institutions are always trying to influence people. Okay. Now, if they have the people's interest at heart, then you've got some interesting things, but it's not so bad because they're looking after the public. When they stray from that and the interests of the people doing the influencing don't have the public's interest at heart, then we begin to have some problems. And that's what we're seeing now. So we've got a group of people influencing so many of the the big institutions around the world, which are supposed to be protecting us, and they've strayed from their that goal. So the path of least resistance is so important, because most of our lives are spent doing things automatically. So when you're driving, you're not thinking about it. When you're playing tennis or when you're working, for the most part, you know, a lot of the things that you do, you don't really think about, do you? You build a good habit and then you do it. Now, so the brain's always wanting to do the path of least resistance. Yeah. And nature's always works with the path of least resistance. Now, there's this thing that's happened in behavioral science, and behavioral science is really just the study of why people think the way they do, how they make decisions, and why they behave the way they behave. Now, they have made some startling discoveries over the last couple of decades, which has allowed them to influence us at a much greater level than they were previously able to do. That makes sense? So that's the real big concern that I see. And that's one of the biggest things that I'm trying to get out there, is that they've essentially made a quantum leap in understanding us. And that quantum leap is that a lot of the things that influence us are not conscious. So if they are able to influence that information, we can be influenced and we will not know that we've been influenced. And that's where this real dangerous area. When you start, it's a bit like a magic trick. If you watch a magic trick and somebody's, you know, got you to pick a card and they guessed it and they kind of got inside your head, you now think that that person has a huge power to influence you. But when you see how he did it, the game's up, isn't it? Yeah, you're not going to fall for it again. And that's why one of the parts of the project is to expose how propaganda works and the specific types of propaganda, so then people are really protected from it and they won't fall for it in the future. And therefore, they've got a much better chance of understanding what the truth is rather than what they think it is.
Johnny.
Well, David, it's 2024, and they've obviously mastered the ability to undertake magic tricks. And
yeah,
a report says in Australia that what we need more than anything is a CDC, a Centre for Disease Control, another authoritarian bureaucratic mess to elicit these behavioural concepts on us.
Yeah. Well, you see, that's what they need. See, we don't need that. That's what they need, because what you have is, if you go into the local shopping mall, okay, and the security guard tells you that you can't do something, is he deciding that? Or has he been told to enforce that? Yeah. So generally, most people are just doing as they're told. So then you get into this very interesting concept of what are the governing factors on when people make decisions. And if those governing factors, so if you keep following up the chain, so if we go to our local council here and they've made a decision, the key question is, has that person really made that decision? So on that path for least resistance, what you have is that, and to explain that first, because then I'll come back to that, John, because it really makes sense. If you come to, let's say you come to a field, guys, and the grass is 2 foot high, but previously 2 paths have been walked. Yeah. And you want to get to the other side. Are you going to walk a new path, or are you going to walk one of those 2 paths?
One of the two. Yeah.
You're going to walk one of those 2 paths. So that's what in behavioral science they call choice architecture. That's understanding the situation you're in and the options you've got available to you. So let's say one of those pathways is to comply and one of those pathways is not to comply. And that's your typical binary decision. What if someone is standing at the do not comply, okay, with boxing gloves on, and he's going to punch you if you go down that path? Yeah. Which pathway are you going to go down now? Yeah. If you're not someone that likes a fight, you're probably going to go down that other pathway. So effectively, what we're talking about there is that the thing is to understand the decisions you've got available to you and then influence you to go down the pathway they want you to go down. That's manipulation. Yeah. And we would do that very subtly. sometimes, and other times not so subtly. But what they're doing is they're effectively putting all the resources to force you down that pathway that they want you to go. Now, some of the manipulation was so overt. For instance, if you don't get the jab, you can't work. And I know Graham and probably John, you both experienced that.
Yeah.
That is a lot of pressure, isn't it? That is literally someone behind you trying to push you down that pathway of compliance. Okay. And it takes a lot of strength to not go down there. And that's why you'll see a lot of the people that spoke up are generally, like in the medical field, a lot of them are retired or they're in positions where their family isn't threatened, like with, not being able to survive, money, etc. So what you've got in any situation is this path of least resistance is so key, because they are working out all the different ways, and they're not even doing it hidden. There's literally documents on this subject. So if you looked in the UK and you went to any of the search engines and you type Mindspace government, you will find a document there that's given to all government departments on how to manipulate the public to follow policy. Okay. And it's truly incredible. And they chose the 9. So if we talk about that path again, so you've got those 2 pathways and you're getting pushed down. They've chose in that document the 9 biggest ways to push someone down one path over another. Makes sense? So when you start to understand the level of understanding they have for this, and of course, so many people said, oh, I got the jab because I needed to go on holiday or I needed to go overseas. Now that seemed quite strange to me at first, because I'm like, why would you wish your health to do that? Not realizing that so much of people's freedom is that 2 to 4 weeks they get off each year. That makes sense. And people really value their freedom. So it's almost like that little last bit of freedom was taken away from them and they didn't want to lose it. Okay. So that was a massive nudge down that way. So this is a really important concept. I mean, because I've gone into this a little bit depth, I've actually strayed away from the original question, John. So if you can repeat it, and then I'll.
Well, it was just in relation to the CDCs, but
Yes.
But
yes. So coming
just back on what you just said there, I mean, those other people too that were going on the holidays, I mean, they were also of the belief, because the government was telling them they weren't in any danger from having the vaccines. In fact, that they were going to be safe.
Yes. So that's such an important point, John, because if you think about you're standing at that pathway now and you've got those 2 options, right? Even if you didn't want to go down that comply route, yeah, you thought to yourself, oh, I really don't want to do that, right? But we all have decisions we don't really want to do, but we don't get a choice. Like when I went through Sydney Airport, I didn't want to use the facial recognition when I went into but I didn't really have a choice at that moment in time. You know what I mean? It's like, right, well, I really value my privacy. I don't want to do this. And Derek Brose, who is a guy in the US doing some really good work, he came into the UK for a seminar recently, and he actually opted out to that. And they locked him in a room for 5 hours, him and his family, interrogated him like he was a terrorist. So what you've got is, if you do want to go down that path of least resistance, that obstacle path, it's not easy. And that's why we've got to get as many people as possible going down that pathway. Or in fact, we inform people enough that pathway becomes automatic for them. That makes sense. And that's why making things simple, that's why that advice you got was really, really key, because simplicity is so important. Because if you're given 2 options and there's really no different, you're going to take the easiest option. That's generally what people do. That's the way that, we want to go with the flow. So the reason that the new CDC and everything is so problematic, because in fact, it allows the people working there not to have to make decisions. And that's what a lot of people want. They don't want to have to think deeply and make decisions. And we, in an ideal world, we would have organizations that had our best interests at heart, and we wouldn't have to go into them too deeply. So we would just trust the information that come to us, because I certainly wouldn't want to spend hours and hours reading about something. I would just want to ask someone that's wise and an expert in. And that's why it was great to be with Angus and Paul, when we were away, because if I want to have information on the cancer information, it's much better to ask Angus than me spend days and weeks and months and years going through that information. So this is why those bodies seem good in theory, but really never work good in reality because they end up in the systems that we work in. Finance becomes so key because it's like everyone's on this treadmill, isn't it? It's not like if you didn't do anything for 2 weeks, okay, there's going to be a bunch of bills come due. Yeah. So it's like we're constantly taxed. So people have to constantly move on this treadmill. And that's the problem. And then what you've got is these centralized organizations. So if you have, so look at the WHO. Okay. So if every country outsources their information to the WHO and someone like Bill Gates wants to influence all those countries, he doesn't have to go to all those countries anymore. He only has to go to the WHO. That makes sense. Yeah. And that's what you find is that the reason this centralization of power, it's almost like a pyramid scheme in more ways than one, in that they don't have to go to thousands of different places to influence it. They get those thousands of different places to come to them. And one of the biggest ways you do that is if you watch the way Bill Gates operates, he ends up funding these places. So it looks like he's a really good man giving this money away. But the thing is with someone like that, if they are giving their money away, why do they keep accumulating more?
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose in some respects, we saw an example of this with Scott Morrison as the Prime Minister in Australia. I mean, he said, oh, we're not mandating, and shifted it onto the state premiers. I mean, this CDC will be no different. I mean, it'll be an opportunity to shift to somebody else to blame.
Yes.
And they'll have people in there who'll just do as they're told, and they'll make everyone's life hell. And the politicians will say, oh, look, we're just operating under the advice of this expert group.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And they go, we're not mandating it. It's not compulsory. You've got choices. But if you don't have it, you won't be able to live. I mean, that's essentially what they're saying. Like in some places, so and that again, it's coming back to those two pathways. Basically, that is a massive pressure. And the other thing is, a lot of people, when they looked at the vaccine, and the propaganda in vaccine industry is like second to none, people didn't realize the potential dangers to it. Okay, so you imagine you're just a member of the public, you don't know much about what's going on, and you're told, look, there's this new vaccine, and the person might interpret it as like taking a couple of headache tablets. You know what I mean? Oh, it's just that. And sometimes people have reactions to headache tablets and blah, blah, blah. That's how it was painted. Yeah. And if you think you're at that gateway and you go, oh, do I go the pathway left or right? Oh, the right, I lose my job. Everyone calls me an idiot. I get crazy. I get shouted at. Or I just go down that left pathway. Yeah. Which isn't not really an excuse in the grand scale of things, but you can begin to understand why so many people went down that pathway. And then what you understand as well is that herd mentality is actually an evolutionary process in that it generally makes sense to do what's popular because it's generally not never, it's generally not a terrible idea. Because if you're walking past two restaurants on holiday and one of them's packed and the other one doesn't have a single customer in it, you generally think you can trust the one with customers in more than the other one. But what if the two owners, the owner of the busy one has got all these cousins around and one of the cousins is standing outside the other one and threatening people if they go in? Okay, that's the reality that we make decisions based on what we're witnessing. Because those trying to influence us know that, they manipulate the information so it doesn't look how it actually is. You see how it can be very persuasive? And then they call someone like you guys, they start calling you crazy, and then they come up with all these wild stories. And then people go, oh, well, what they're saying, they're just crazy people.
Yeah, it's funny because I think humanity is geared up to be around the basis that it's much easier to be one of the oppressors than one of the oppressed.
Yeah, but they won't see it that way.
No, they won't see it that way. That's the path of least resistance.
Yeah, well, they're always going to see themselves on the righteous path as well. So basically, what you have going on is that generally when anyone goes to war, they always think they're on the right side because, you know, the propaganda on that side will do that really good job at convincing people. Now, we generally don't want to believe that history has happened in the sense of we generally don't learn from history because we don't understand that we're vulnerable to influence. So I was on one call recently and one of the doctors said, how are the psychologists falling for this? And in fact, they generally fall for it more than others. Is that he says, oh, it's so obvious now. And I said, yeah, but when did you spot it? And he said, 3 years ago. And I said, well, why not 5 years ago? And if 5 years ago, why not 10 years ago? And if 10 years ago, why not 15 years ago? Because it's generally always been going in the background. And yes, it's massively much more in the foreground now. But until you've had an experience or a series of experiences that lead you to see that what you thought isn't actually the truth, then, and that's what's really interesting. When you talk to people about why they hadn't, what made them aware of what was going on, it's not ever that someone told me this. It's usually that they've had an experience, they've watched something, and it might be that their cousin died in a car crash and they put COVID on the death cert. And that was such a, that didn't make sense that it really alerted them. And that's why so many people become aware. So if you can share stories with people of things that just don't make sense, but you have to have already got the connection with people before you do that. That makes sense. So that's why, because you have to think like, you two guys, what you know, and all the vast experiences. But when you're talking to someone for the first time, they don't see any of that. But we often don't take that into consideration. And it's literally, how is this person going to hear what I'm going to say? Yeah, when you start to think about that, for instance, we may, I've got a couple of funny stories around this actually, but we generally will respond automatically. We won't think too much about what we do. So if someone screams at you, put your mask on, what's going to be our general response to that? Okay, it's not going to be a pleasant one, is it? Right? But what happens if we scream the opposite? Okay. Now we don't think, right, well, that they're just going to tell us to get lost. You know what I mean? And so many of the conversations that people have, they don't think about how the other person's going to see it. Okay. Because they can see, well, it's so bloody obvious. If you can't see it now, you must be an idiot, et cetera, et cetera. But if someone's fallen down the trap of watching the media, they're going to have so many false ideas in their mind that's allowed them to reach that conclusion. They've also have so much pressure. And this is another key point is worth mentioning. If somebody has given the vaccine to other people, are they going to want to believe that's safe? Okay, that is a huge pressure. That is a huge path of least resistance. If they had two options, right? Consider that they might have harmed a large amount of people or pretend that they haven't. Which one of those paths is the path of least resistance? Okay, you can see it, understand, and people double down. And this is what happens. And they won't always do it consciously. Sometimes they will just delude themselves to such a degree that and from the outside, I mean, you know what it's like. You watch someone making a statement and you're like, oh my God, how can but this is the power of propaganda. When you can get someone to believe something, beliefs become very problematic. They're like Japanese knotweed. They just get in there and they start infecting the rest of the mind. And that's why when you look at people, where if you said to them 5 years ago, is it okay to hold someone down and inject them with something they don't want in their body? What would most people say?
No way.
No, that's a fascist idea. But once they were led to think that was okay,
and that it would protect them.
Exactly, because once their health and their well-being and their future becomes a threat, people generally care about things that affect them. That's another point. So when we're talking to people, find the things that are important to them, because if you don't, they're not really going to care what you're talking about.
Well, a good example of that, I don't know whether you remember, Hoodie, there was an advert which we might be able to splice in, was on road safety, and it was in New South Wales. And they interviewed a gentleman and they said to him, how many, there's 300 deaths in New South Wales. Do you think that's an acceptable number? And he said, yes. And then they opened the gates and 300 of his relatives came out. And they said to him, well, how many do you think's acceptable now? And he said 0. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really powerful. See, the thing is with that, because it's such a convincing story. The problem is, if you'd have said to him, everyone loses their freedom to save those people, what do you do now? Okay. And then you look at, why have we fought wars in the past? Why didn't every country just roll over on its belly and say, do what you want? Because you're defending freedom. Yeah. So historically, we value freedom above you know, fighting for it. You know, so if we didn't, every country would just roll over like a belly the minute anyone invaded them. But that's not happened through history. Generally, most countries defend themselves because they know the value of freedom. The problem now is that, one, people really don't. I think the word freedom has taken on a crazy label for some reason. Like, you'll hear someone go, "Oh, that's one of those freedom lovers." Like, that's a bad thing. Like, yeah, but that what you said there, John, is such powerful propaganda, because it can really shift people to say, okay, well, 0 deaths on the road is acceptable. How do we achieve that? Well, we don't let people drive, or we make everything automatic car. So then what you've got is people have literally lost their freedom to travel. Okay. Now, let's not confuse that with, yes, we need to ensure that things that can be done, you know, safety and all these things. But, you know, there's always this age-old thing of trading freedom for safety. Okay. And I think there was one famous American that said, anyone that trades freedom for safety deserves neither.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what we're finding. And that's why your speech, Graham, when you were talking about, you know, historic NZ and Australian, you know, battling together, really shows people that's the pride we have to. And even though we've been lied to about so many of the wars, that's true. But people, if they think they're defending their freedom, historically, that's been something people fought for. But now it's very different, the way that people have been influenced to see how the world should work. And if people come to accept that somebody else has the right to nose into their business, okay, and they accept that, then they've really just given away so much of their freedom, haven't they?
They have, yeah. And I've found in the last 3 years that I've gone through a myriad of emotions through all of this. You know, we often get called names and attacked and trolled and all that sort of stuff. And I start to come back with compassion rather than resentment.
Yes.
That always wins. And I was wearing a t-shirt in the shopping centre just recently, and a guy had a go at me about the t-shirt. It was obviously a vaccine related one. I forget which one I was wearing. And he said, "What are you, a doctor, are you?" And I said, No. I said, "I'm just an Aussie, just like you." And he said, "So why are you so head up about this?" I said, I just want to know the truth." He said, "What about?" I said, "Well, if you thought someone was tampering with your DNA or your immune system, would you want to know about it? Would you want to know about it?" He said, "Of course I would." I said, "Yeah, me too." And he said,
see how good that conversation would go, because you're not attacking him.
No. I said, "Me too. I'm just concerned that there might be a chance that someone's doing that. And if there is a chance that someone's doing that, then I should be able to voice that concern and have someone reassure me that they're not, someone in authority to reassure. Wouldn't you want that too?" And, you know, there would be some people that say, "No, I don't want to know."
Yeah. But would you want somebody else to know for you? You know, it's, yeah, see, you've demonstrated in that conversation, just there's so many things in that. Okay. So basically, one of the concepts we talk about, and that story, remember, with the elderly lady in the park that I told at the conference, really highlights that. This is another concept: do not step in the ring with someone. Okay. So you've, and that's why I generally don't recommend wearing those t-shirts, but because of that reason. Yeah, because effectively it's almost like throwing the first punch. You know what I mean? And some guys coming up, it's like, okay, well, I'll step in the ring with you. And you then turned around and said, actually, no, I don't want to step in the ring. I'm actually in your corner. Okay. And that's the thing. Don't step in the ring with people. People are going to invite you for an argument all day long. But excuse me, if you step in the ring, there's no good outcome. Yeah, even if you beat him or he beats you, you haven't connected, you haven't exchanged information, you've just become enemies. And that's why, and it's the toughest thing to do. So, and I say to people, and I don't tell them you must you know, you must get in someone's corner. I say to them, look, you have a choice and you have options, and you are, you know, you want to be in control of your own life. So that's really key. Okay. So, but if you want to understand how to get through to that person, and you know that stepping in that ring is not going to be useful, then you might think about not stepping in that ring. Okay. there's going to be times when, because this is such a key concept, and even, me presenting on this subject, every now and then I will step in the ring. People will just invite me too well to step in the ring, and I'll say something to them, and that's okay. And then afterwards I'll think it through and wonder why it happened, because they've essentially they're pressing your buttons. Okay. But you guys have had so much experience at this that it's just water off a duck's back now, isn't it? Yeah. And
Yeah,
you
it
get
is.
good, and you realize that coming back with compassion, whilst not fair, actually moves us to the destination much better. Because those pushing the propaganda, they want us all in the ring fighting each other. Okay. Because we're not fighting them.
I mean, even your opening remarks there about going to hospital. I mean, there's been so much talk in the media, and as a result of this COVID inquiry that's come out, about lack of confidence in everything, and certainly there is a lack of confidence in the medical system at the moment. But I mean, you still put your faith in the medical system. I mean, I'm not saying that I'd be taking any further vaccines until I get some more information on what's actually going on. But I mean, it doesn't mean I don't trust the people and the health system. I mean, I still do.
Well, sorry, go on, Graham.
No, I was happy to go to that hospital. It was the hospital of my choice. I've still got private health cover, and I chose to go the extra mile to get to that hospital because I've had good experiences there before, and I wasn't let down. I was treated very well. I was treated promptly. They answered my questions. I was much more inquisitive about what I was being given and what procedures I was involved in, but I did it with respect. I didn't ram anything down anybody's throat, and I came away feeling glad I went there. And that's the experience we should have in our hospitals. We've been standing up for people who've lost so much. Nurses unemployed, paramedics, and so on. But that doesn't mean the people who are still there aren't good people, and they are, and their hearts are so good. And I had this lovely lady walk through one part of the hospital I was in her scrubs, and she saw me and she hugged me and she burst into tears, and she hugged Michelle and I for about 15 minutes, and she was just talking about her experience, about how much she'd lost, and she's only just come back into the system, and she's not trusted, and she's not allowed to practice her primary speciality because it's to do with cardiology. And she just says that, we don't know who to trust anymore. And but she said there's more and more people open about what's going on. Cancer rates are going through the roof. The hospitals, so many doctors are saying we don't understand.
They're baffled, yeah.
Yeah, they're baffled why the cancer rates are going up. And one doctor I spoke to said, I got vaccinated to keep my job, to feed my kids, but there's no way I'd vaccinate my children with it.
Yeah.
So, the knowledge is out there. And all I did was direct this particular doctor, to watch Club Grubbery with Paul Marrick and Phil and Angus that we had on the other night. And I know he would have watched it. So, it wasn't just, you're a doctor, you should know better than this. He just said to me, what triggered you not to do it? And when I told him I couldn't give informed consent because there was no information, he said, you're right. He said, we didn't have any information to give anybody.
Yeah. See, that's so key. I mean, there's so many things in that conversation to unpack. And the key is, and really Voltaire, who's a French philosopher, he made a number of really profound statements hundreds of years ago where he said, if you can convince me of absurdities, I can commit atrocities. Okay. So it's all about how effective is that propaganda or just information or education at convincing me that one thing is one thing and not another. Now, where are the doctors getting their information from? That's the key. So if a doctor's reading a book on anatomy, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to know anatomy. That's one of those cut and dry ones. Then they're going to have a much better understanding of anatomy than another person. If anyone's in a car crash or any sort of accident, you're going to want to be in an ER, emergency room, because they're going to know how to stitch you up, patch you up. They're going to know that side of things so well. But when it comes to what we should eat, what we should drink, all these things, they haven't been educated. I heard a number of people state that in 7 years of doctor's training, they get something like an afternoon of nutrition. Okay. Now, you go to any functional doctor or any practitioner that has really great success with their clients, one of the things they're going to ask you is, what do you eat? They're going to ask you how you relax. They're going to ask you how you sleep. They're going to ask you all these questions that they will then understand how you've arrived at the state of health you've arrived at, and they're going to try and undo that. Anyone that says, "I'll just take this pill," okay, right? Anyone that understands logic will realize that that's rarely going to be a solution to the problem. That's usually going to be managing the problem. But here's the problem. The money is not in preventing illness. Okay.
No.
There was a post the other day that something like 20% of the US GDP comes from the healthcare. So it's not in their interests to solve that. So when you look at the way that cars break down now, and I've literally met people that have worked on the projects where they've designed the car to break a certain time. So you've got this thing called built-in obsolescence. So then you say, why are people doing the things they do? Generally because of the pressures and the pathways they're forced down. And a lot of that's because of the banking systems we find ourselves in. Yeah. You literally can't stop for a month or two and do nothing because you've got these pressures pushing you down. So therefore, when it comes to a doctor saying, right, well, you can have 100,000 if you go and inject this many people, okay? And he's literally, so it's the path of least resistance is to just go along with that and think, well, they're the experts, there's loads of people governing this, it's not my problem, et cetera, et cetera. But those people that go, hang on a minute, this doesn't add up. Where's the informed consent? Okay. And all these things. So it really does take just having experiences in the past and to have that's why a strong moral code is important, because if someone has a strong moral code, then you can't buy them, and that's when the bribes and incentives and all those things start working. Because there's a really key point here that I wish to make, actually, which is how we predict what we're doing in a situation and how we will actually do. You never really know until you're there, until you've had that situation. So anyone that spoke up the last 5 years, they pretty much know that they would speak up in those situations. Okay. There's a lot of people that I bet you, if you asked them 6-7 years ago, if this happened, would they speak up? Many of them would. So everyone's probably familiar with the Milgram experiment. Yeah. So I quickly say about this. So Stanley Milgram was trying to understand why people were influenced to do bad things, and he set up this study, which was seeing if people would push a button to give another person an electric shock, potentially fatal, just because someone in a white coat told them to do so. So how many people are going to basically surrender to authority? Now, it turns out that 67% of the population would literally push that button if they felt the pressure to do so. Now, that's a startling number. But when he interviewed experts before the study, the psychology students guessed at 1 in 100 people. The true experts guessed at 1 in 1,000. Okay. So what you've got is people think they're going to be able to resist influence and pressure, but the statistics through history tell us that they don't.
Yeah.
Okay. And we can go off, because that's another big part of the project. That I did an interview with Tess Laurie where we went into this in depth, which I'd recommend people reading if they're interested in that. But basically, it's all about, if they now know which buttons to push to influence us, and we don't know that we're going to be influenced, that kind of stealth power is so huge that it really shouldn't be in a few people's hands. And that's one of the primary things of our project, is to get that information out so people can decide what happens with it.
Wow, a lot to unpack, isn't it?
Yeah, there's so much, and it's important to keep things simple, as you say. But yeah, we've got plenty of documents that people can go through these things one at a time, and that's really what it is. So how do you guys eat an elephant? Not that you'd want to, but if one bite at a time.
At the moment, it's dinner time. I could eat an elephant. John see me put a bit of tucker away, but one mouthful at a time. That's all you can
Usually
do.
while I'm having a glass of red.
Exactly. But there's so much to be considered. Where we were 2 years ago to where we are now, yeah,
yeah,
is a is a big jump. And yeah, there's a lot of people that are angry, rightly so. There's a lot of people frustrated. There's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of people grieving for potential things that might have already happened or potential to happen. So yeah, there's a lot of challenge in the world today. But this is the thing. There's a group of people that are trying to exert more pressure than they should or deserve or have any right to. And at some point, we've got to put our feet in and say no. Yeah. And that's where we're reaching now, that people don't realize the threat that we face now is far greater than any of those physical invasions that we've had through history.
Exactly. And the power of the word no. We don't need a gun. We just need the word no, a collective no. Dave, before we let you go, give us an impression of the mood in the UK at the moment. Where's it sitting?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to ask because I've kind of extracted myself from a lot of, like yourself, I bought a place out in the middle of nowhere and I spend most of my time there, and I spend most of my time dealing with groups overseas and in the UK. But my general understanding is that it's not particularly good, in that we're under the subject of a huge amount of pressure and propaganda to bring in policies that are crazy. So they're pushing these 15-minute cities things. There's cameras going up everywhere. There's roadworks continuously. The taxes are going up. I had an instance last Saturday that shocked me to the core, which is I went to buy some gold because I was thinking, okay, I don't trust the banks so much. They blocked the transaction, okay, and they still haven't unblocked it. And the conversation that I had with the bank was truly crazy. I mean, the things that they were saying to me is incredible. The company I bought this from, I've dealt with them many times over the years. I identified myself. I said what I was doing. I had the money in there, but they wouldn't let me buy that. They somehow think that they can dictate how I spend my money with. And I made a post on social media and I had hundreds of people saying the same. So what the banks are doing now is they're actually poking their noses into such a large degree that they won't let you transfer some money to a friend or go buy a car with cash, or even transfer it. They literally have decided that they have the right to do what they want you to do. And what you're going to see, so you guys see the Stanford prison experiment?
No.
So basically, it was an experiment that showed that if you give someone a little bit of power and a certain direction, that they can turn into a really bad person. And this is what you're seeing in many, so the security guard that gets angry with you, he's probably not like that in his home life, or maybe he is, who knows. But you can get good people to do bad things under the right conditions, and that's what we're seeing. And that's why what you mentioned, you guys, the collective no is so key, because if nobody will carry out these crazy rules, they can't enforce them. The problem is that there's so many incentives around people doing that.
Yeah, what's really interesting, getting back to your transaction problems, the same things are happening at this moment now in Australia, the exact same things. People are having their bank accounts cancelled because they're not using their cards and are using too much cash.
Heritage Bank.
There were outside the Australian Bullion Company, I think it was in Sydney, there was a photograph of massive queue of people queuing up the street to go in to buy gold. And we're seeing the same things pulled at the same time. Like the global governments are using this one playbook, which they obviously are. So it's interesting that you brought that up, because that's a hot topic here at the moment. It's craziness, absolute craziness, but we can see where it's going.
Yeah, that's actually a good point to finish on. Neil Oliver made a tweet a little while ago, and it was so important. He said, and this was because we were changing prime minister, and he said they're changing the driver of the train on tracks that have been laid a long while ago. Okay, so they've laid these tracks down, and this train is heading to a destination, and they're convincing you that destination is in your interest. And if you change the train driver every now and then, that's going to make no difference. We need to change. We need to get off the train, and we need to change the train tracks to go to a place that serves us. The reason that this is happening at the same place, all around the world at the same time, is because they've influenced all of those centralized institutions to implement the plan that they wish to, how they wish to see the future. Okay. And that's the key thing. This isn't, people think that the world just moves along and you randomly arrive at things collectively and what the people want. No, so much of what's going on is designed. okay, and implemented to serve the corporations. And the supermarkets are getting really bad here now. So there's literally, and I would advise people to buy from farm shops and organic farms, etc., you know, to support their communities. But if one goes into a supermarket now, there's like barriers up everywhere, there's facial recognition. It's just insane. Now, what are they preparing for? Okay. You know what I mean? It's like, why would they need all of that? Okay. And then they talk about this cost of living crisis. I mean, this is the other thing, cost of living crisis, my arse. It's basically the cost of greed crisis. All the big corporations here are making 10x profits. Okay. That's not a cost of living crisis. That's basically they're trying to put people under so much pressure because, you know, if you give a starving man a cracker, okay, you become his friend. And that's literally what's happening. The government is seen as this thing that gives nothing is government funded. Okay. Everything is taxpayer funded. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a really important distinction that people need to understand, especially them. Rant
Fascinating.
over.
We could go on for another hour easily, and I think we need to get you back on again because there's been some very interesting perspectives here, John. Any final question for Dave before we go?
Well, I think his summation there. I mean, it's interesting you talk about the train driver. I mean, because Liz Truss was out here recently, and I got the impression, not that I listened to her for any great length of time, but I got the impression that she was completely with us. But I heard that the bureaucrats were basically untouchable, and she had no control over them, and she was removed. They obviously saw her as a threat.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I don't know enough about the lady, but the little bit that I saw, she certainly had more of my respect than any of the others. So we had an election. They say, right, who do you want as prime minister? And we go, we want Liz Truss. No, pick again. Like literally, they got her out in 30 days because she's literally on that train going, hang on a minute. Like, you know, is this going where we want it to go? So anyone that pushes against that, they're ousted very quickly. And that's why people don't realize why are all of them doing the same thing? Because if they weren't, they wouldn't be there. They're funded by and funding is very powerful. But she made a comment, which was she realized that the Bank of England governor was more powerful than she was. Okay. And she got called a conspiracy theorist for that. Like, because they had to use that label because they had to shut her up because obviously the ex-prime minister, people are going to listen to at least what she has to say, you know, because you don't become prime minister apparently if you're crazy. But yeah, she was really interesting what she talked about. It really does come down to that train tracks that so many people on that train, you know, begrudgingly or not, are only deciding, you know, the speed of it. Like a lot of the time it's I mean, even now, you know, they're automated, aren't they? They're just sitting there watching. So yeah, it's a very important concept to understand that we really want to look at people's actions and not their words. That's when you really understand what that true intention is. There's a good reason for everything, and they're always going to tell you the good reason. But what is the real reason? Okay. And the fraud departments, in my opinion, in the banks is not to protect me, it's to protect them. Okay. And to stop us moving money around.
Well, the misinformation, disinformation bill, which will soon be pushed through the parliament, one of the main organisations, institutions it's designed to protect is the banks. You are not allowed to speak out publicly against the banks.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
Yeah, well, they always say those you can't say things against are those doing the problem.
That's the problem. Well, I reckon we normally close with a prayer, Dave. If you don't mind, I'll just say a quick prayer.
Yep, that's if I could just say, people that want to find out more, they can go to the website reachingpeople.net. Under the interviews, there's lots of interviews. There's many more I haven't had a chance to put up there. And the YouTube channel has lots of free videos people can watch to understand more about this. And there's articles. So yeah, there's lots of free information that people can inform themselves. And it's just the information that's there that we've found that's in the sphere could really help people reach others better. So
that sounded like an invitation by Dave to interview us, John.
Indeed.
All right, let's close with a prayer. Dear Lord Father in heaven, we thank you for David and his time and his candor, and we thank you for his expertise, Lord. And we just pray that all these things will help us to have conversations that will heal and restore our spirit and bring us back to freedom. Father God, it's going crazy, and we just need all the help we can get, and we beg that we get that from you in Jesus' name. Amen. Johnny, you've often been heard to say
You just couldn't make this stuff up.
you couldn't make this stuff up. Dave Charalambous, you're a great guy. It's been a pleasure to know you. It's been a pleasure to eat your chocolate and sit at a dinner table. You make a pretty good omelette too, I've got to admit. And
Thank you.
and I'm sure we're going to catch up around the ridges, and we'd love to have you back on Club Grubbery.
Actually,
It'd
have to get you to the Journey Licorice and Chocolate Factory.
be,
No, don't take him there. He hasn't got enough money. He hasn't got enough money. All right, everybody, stay out of the trees. Don't forget, if you love somebody and you haven't told them, make sure you do. You might just save their life. It's a great country because you live in it. We're all doing the best we can under trying circumstances. So be loving and compassionate no matter what your viewpoints, and we'll all win. So aim for win-win, and God bless you. And we'll see you next time on Club Grubbery. Bye for now.